So Dawn of Majesty is finally out, and everyone's trying to get their hand on new Despia cards or trying to pull a ready fusion, all that good stuff. But outside of secret rares and new archetypes, there's actually quite a few cards that manage to slip through the cracks and go relatively unnoticed. Most of the time, it's because they're, well, straight up terrible. But sometimes you'll get a card that's at the very least usable. And because no one's paying attention to them, they're dirt cheap. So today I'm going to go over 8 cards from Dawn of Majesty that no one's really been paying attention to, and find at least one use for all of them. To start off fairly strong, there's Slower Swallow. A level 1 wind-winged beast, it has the effect where it can summon itself from the hand if you have 2 monsters of the same level on the field, and then a second effect, it doubles the amount of cards you draw during your next draw phase. At the cost of tributing this card, I'd say that it's actually far better to just ignore the second effect altogether, and see this card for what it really is, a free extender. The deck that immediately comes to mind when I see this card is Lyrilisk, a deck also made entirely out of level 1 wind-winged beasts. This card is just another free Xyz material for one of their extra deck monsters, so there's no reason not to run it. Another deck that could also consider this card is anything that you're splashing Tri-Brigades into, as long as they use monsters of the same level. Tri-Brigade Harpies are an example, since all of the Harpies are level 4, so this card could just summon itself as another material for the Tri-Brigade Link monsters. The next card is Link Apple. As a level 1 Fire Cyberse, it allows you to reveal it in your hand before banishing a random card from your extra deck, gaining a different effect based off whether the one you banished was a Link monster or not. If it was, you get to special summon Link Apple, but if it wasn't, you instead have to discard it and then draw a card. Now I'm sure most people have looked at this card and dismissed it as a possible extender in Cyberse decks that just isn't worth the cost of potentially banishing your access code talker, but I'm actually looking at it for its other effect. You see, if you're playing some kind of deck that needs to draw a lot, and that doesn't require Link monsters, nor specific limited 1 extra deck monsters, you can actually just consider this card to be an upstart goblin, without giving your opponents extra life points. You just reveal it, banish anything from your extra deck, it really doesn't matter, and then discard Link Apple to draw a new card. Now decks that actually fit that criteria are probably few and far between, with Fortune Ladies being an example that comes to mind. Next we have a Link 2 monster, Dispatch Parazzi. At a cost of any 2 effect monsters, you now have a card that can redirect an attack from another monster onto itself, destroy whatever just attacked it, and then even regain a few life points. In almost all situations, you wouldn't want to wait until the battle phase for such a weak effect. There's actually one scenario that comes up fairly often in competitive play, in which this card could be useful. That's every deck that relies on barrier statues to lock your opponent out of special summoning. If you're just sitting on a barrier statue of Stormwinds, your opponent needs to normal summon a monster with more attack than it has defense, and then attack over it before doing their combo in the main phase 2. Usually you'd try to protect it with Aeropixthree, but if you get interrupted, or if your deck just can't quite get out enough materials, this card functions like a mini Aeromax in that situation, protecting your barrier statue from being beaten over by their normal summon. Now for some quick ones. The first is Konohanasakuya, a spirit monster. They still make those? Anyway, if you have another spirit monster on the field, it can special summon itself, and like most spirits, it returns to the hand during the end phase. But the interesting effect is its second one, which prevents one of your own spirit monsters from activating its effects. The reason you'd want to stop your own monster effects is to prevent another spirit monster from returning to the hand, most notably Amano Iwato. So if you have a Konohanasakuya in the graveyard and an Amano Iwato on the field, it'll keep the rock around, which just stops all monsters from activating any effects anywhere. Unless they're spirits, but nobody's playing spirits. The next one is Aeropixthree. While this is definitely scraping the bottom of the barrel, I did find a use for this card. Basically, it can target an opponent's monster and move it to whichever main monster zone you want. Being a level 1 monster, you can then immediately link it into a relinquished anima after moving their monster in front of your link zone, and then just suck it up, gaining their attack and removing their monster in the process. Maybe worth it in a deck that can easily get out fairies, or maybe even something like a Kaiju deck. Then we have Margin Trading, a card that's actually worse the second time you read it. To start off, it can be negated by your opponent just discarding a card, which sounds like you're making them lose a card, but really, it will just be an opportunity for them to get something into the graveyard. If they don't though, both players look at their opponent's deck and choose one card that will be added to that deck's owner's hand. So to be clear, you don't swap cards. You both get the card chosen from your own deck. Why would you ever want to do that? Well, a serious deck most likely won't want to. If you're playing in a casual setting, or you're just really afraid of Vertianaconda sending a Red Eyes fusion, you can force your opponent to draw a Garnet and ruin their combos. Maybe the day will come in which there's some godly tier 1 deck dominating the meta, but it also happens to completely fall apart if they draw their one Garnet. In which case, this deck would be a funny way to piss people off in the simulators. But otherwise, yeah, it's mostly just for the memes. Finally, raising the bar back up a bit, the last 2 cards involve normal monsters. Oh, come on. Well anyway, the first one is High Ritual Art, a card that starts off really good, and then progressively just goes downhill. While it does let you ritual summon a monster from the deck, it requires you to use normal monsters from your hand, and even then, the monster only gets to stick around for 2 turns when it does get summoned. So here's a concrete example of a deck that can play it. In Blue Eyes Chaos Max decks, simply run the White Stone of Legends and an Almirage to link it away, which will search you a Blue Eyes White Dragon. Then use High Ritual Art to make a Chaos Max, and try to 80k if going second. Or, if you're going first, just make an Amifactor Pain to skip their main phase 1 and their battle phase, while also negating the effects of extra deck monsters that aren't links. And now hey, would you look at that? You just happen to have a ritual monster that was made using a normal monster as a material. Now's a great time to activate our next card, DDD, Different Dimension Derby. If you control anything that used a normal monster as a material, it gives you a targeted banish of any card on the field. Now people still use Paleozoic Dinomischus, which has the same effect, at the cost of discarding a card which this card doesn't need, so it's useful in the aforementioned Chaos Max decks, but also in some of the newer decks that have been using normal monsters, like Sun Avalon, Magiki, or even Suship. So what do you think about these cards? Did I manage to convince you on any of these, or do you still think they're just terrible? Either way, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. That's all for today.